on learning cities. And I'm very pleased to see that that apparently your work is continuing, and also I really do hope that it's possible for you to have some cooperation with the UNESCO Global Network on Learning Cities, even though the US is not a member of the UNESCO for the time being. Annalisa has asked me to give a personal reflection on the start of the learning city concept in the UNESCO framework, and also some hopes I could have, or expectations on the future development. I think the idea of a learning city, in fact, sprung out on a background of the Confintier 5, the World Congress on Adult Education in 1997, because the document that came out of this international conference or Congress Confintier was extremely visionary, wonderful, beautiful document that could inspire the whole world of adult educators. What was experienced, though, in the years after 97 was the difficulty of implementing all these beautiful visions. And that led to another take in Confintier 6, 2009, in Belém in Brazil, where everything then turned around a concluding document then called the Belém Framework for Action, which was about implementation, measurement, monitoring of results of developing adult education in the member states around the world. So the Belém Framework for Action then turned around 5 areas of action, apart from the overall area of action, which is literacy, of course. But apart from literacy, then the 5 areas of action that then should be monitored in the next 12 years before Confintier 7, which we now know will take place in June 15 to 17 this year in the city of Marrakesh in Morocco. Then the monitoring would take place. So the 5 areas of action had to have very clear targets, so they were easy to monitor, to measure. So the first one was then to see development of laws on adult education in member states. The second was to look at improved governance in adult education. The third, to increase participation rates, inclusion, equity. The fourth about funding, which for some reasons always is part of any conference document, more funding for adult education. And the last one was about better quality in the whole field, which soon came down to quality of adult educators or teacher training and so on, but also to some other instruments. I was, I guess, overall responsible for some years for the implementation of the Belém Framework for Action from the side of UNESCO, as it's the UNESCO's Institute for Lifelong Learning that is responsible for the monitoring, apart, of course, for the real work being done in the countries. And we looked at good cases, success cases hitherto in these 5 fields, the 5 areas of action. And we could see when we analyzed it that even if many countries have a law on adult education, then it's not always that the law is being really implemented. So it's not always, at least to success, that there is a law. There's a gap, there's an obstacle between passing the law and its implementation. So we tried to see where should it be implemented, this law. The law normally is adopted at the national level or the federal level, but the real implementation takes place out in districts or in cities, towns, villages. And therefore we came to see that if really we want to support adult education, we should focus more on this level. Municipalities, town halls, district councils, and so on. Therefore, the whole discussion about developing the learning society, which often was related to the adoption of a law on adult education, we then took down to the governance level, district level, and so, okay, but then it's about the implementation takes place in the community, in the district, in the city, and therefore we need to focus more on the learning city than on the learning society. Learning society, the national or federal level, now we take it to the next level, to the district councils, as a learning city. And then we see if that will be more easy. That was how we got to the idea of focusing on cities. Then the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, which for many years we knew best for its work in PISA to measure the learning outcomes of children when they leave school. And now also we know, not as well, but somehow also for its measurement of learning outcomes of skills of adults in PIAC. Then they in fact took an initiative already in the 1990s, I think 1993, where they also focused on cities. But you know, the OECD is the rich countries club, and they had some success. I think Vancouver then declared itself a learning city. We also have many initiatives in relation to a learning city. But I think the strongest, it died out gradually, but the strongest was maybe learning festivals, learning weeks, adult learners weeks, and so on, that also, by the way, was monitored then by the UNESCO Institute for Lifelong Learning in Hamburg. So in my view, the background for the concept of learning city was the effort to implement the Blem framework for action of Confidentier 6, plus a concrete case from the side of OECD from the beginning of the 90s. And you know, 1996 was it was a golden time of adult education in Europe. So there was the European year, 1996, of lifelong learning. There was the OECD year, same year, 1996, of lifelong learning. So I think that was the reason why OECD also was taking it up in relation to cities. But then we tried to work on it. A colleague of mine from China, my right hand in the institute in Hamburg, and I, and we developed a concept in the UNESCO context. And you are familiar with the UNESCO temple. You can see the pillars of learning that we built into the Learning City temple, which is the UNESCO temple. They come from the UNESCO context. And you're familiar with all the elements in the pillars, the walls, the bricks, the roof, and so on, with informal learning, family learning, and so on. We managed to get the first conference in 2013 in Beijing, and then it has been running ever since, from trying to finalize and refine the conceptual tools over the different international conferences, the one in Cork as well, and over stages of prioritizing sustainable development, prioritizing health in the last instance, and so on. I'm sorry that Dennis has been forced to receive the Ukrainian refugees this afternoon here in Cork City. So he is not here to speak about how the different conferences have interacted and how also the different cities have learned from each other. Because one part of it was that the city sets up its own learning city strategy, and it tries to put up targets and measurement instruments to monitor the progress every year or every second year. Another thing is what each city can learn from each other, which I think is not the least interesting things. But therefore, we wanted to stimulate and motivate cities, and so we started to think, what do mayors like? They like to have an award hanging on the wall in their office. So therefore, we developed the UNESCO Learning City Award that we handed out first time in the conference in 2015 in Mexico City. And I think today the members of the global network is more than 300, and the number of cities that are receiving the awards is ever increasing. So what are the new elements, in my view, that is influencing the current development of the Learning City concept? I think what influenced it after Cork was probably the publication of the Grail. You know, one part of the monitoring of progress of the 5 areas of action in the Belém framework for action was the publication of a global report on adult learning and education that we call then the Grail, the Holy Grail, where every country is asked to provide statistics on progress in the 5 areas of action. In fact, 6, including literacy. And the Grail we published then in 2016, 6 years ago. I think we was built on statistics from 144 countries. I had included health in the topic. I mean, health is not in the Berlin framework for action. It's not one of these areas. But I thought that that all adults, in fact, all children and youngsters as well, need to know more about diseases, sickness, be more responsible for their own well-being. So they need to learn more about it, to deal with it, next to the responsibility of their society, of course, and their town. So we included health in the Grail, and I involved people from the World Health Organization to come and help edit it as well, by the way, as also inviting people from the International Labour Organization, the ILO, because we wanted to have a stronger focus on workplace learning as well. Workplace learning is one of the pillars in the temple of the learning city. So we had a strong focus on technical vocational education and training, workplace learning, but also then on health. And I'm pleased to see that the health aspect now has come in, so that the last international conference on learning cities, which now took place in South Korea, had the theme of health for the outcome document. And even though it was not part of the Berlin framework for action, of course, we could not know about the pandemic that just came in some years later. So it was just a coincidence. But there was also another document, I think, that came in the middle phase here and influenced the conceptual development of the learning city, and that's the recommendation, the Rail, so-called, the recommendation, UNESCO recommendation on adult learning and education. And it was published in 2015, same year as the UN 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. And where the UN Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development has, as you know, a goal on education. The life-changing aspect for adult educators here is that the goal 4 is called quality education and lifelong learning for all. It's the first time I have ever seen that lifelong learning has been considered at the same level as education. Education in kindergarten, in school, at university. Here, lifelong learning at par. First time I ever have seen that. It was not that pregnant in the 10 years before the new agenda, which was the Education for All agenda, but now it was there. So I think that meant that lifelong learning was, adult education could no longer claim that lifelong learning is the same as adult education. And now adult education had to consider its place in the overall picture of lifelong learning. Because lifelong learning is also preschool and post university, well, or university, formal, informal, and non-formal education elements in the whole learning system, and of course also workplace learning, a big part of it, and technical vocational education and training. So I think the Learning City conceptual development from 2015, 2016 had to relate also to the UN Agenda 2030 for a sustainable development, with all its focus on sustainability, green environmental education, and all the 17 SDGs, not only Goal 4 on education and lifelong learning, because there is adult education and lifelong learning in all the other 16 goals as well. So a good part of the focus on further conceptual development of learning cities is to relate it to all the other 16 goals and see what's the role here of adult education, of inclusion, and equity in the city, and so on. And then also the Grail, the recommendation on adult learning and education, which we published in 2015 at the same time as the 2030 agenda. There was an adult education a recommendation from the 1970s on the development of adult education from 1974, I think. But we wanted to modernize it. I was chairing the committee who did it, and then in the end, it was adopted by the General Conference of UNESCO, which is all the member states, 196 countries. And here we introduced, of course, more ICT in the focus for adult education. It's a normative instrument. What should adult education do at the national level? Include more information technology in general in adult education activities, and then also more international cooperation. Learn more from other partners around the world. A last element was focus more on technical and vocational education and training, and stop, as many social movements have done over time, to see workplace learning or anything that had to do with work as in opposition to liberal adult education, civil society, social movement, learning, and so on, but try to see it's one part of a whole. So I think these are two strong elements from 2015-16 that also came into color the further development of the learning city, concept. Let me finish here with my hopes for the next chapter. I'm very pleased to see that now the ASEM Lifelong Learning Hub, the Asia-Europe meeting, which is now hosted by Cork, UCC, the University College Cork, has now created a research network number 6, which is on learning city research. And this is one of the important parts, I think, for the future development of learning cities. That is to strengthen the research part of it, so that researchers from many universities, they can share research theories, theoretical aspects on analysis of learning city development, as well as also empirical analysis. So we also have this work based at the universities, and not only in the city councils, as empirical collection of data that collects the progress in the different areas that have been adopted by the named city. Every city adopts 5 or 6 points that it wants to concentrate on. Of the, I think we made all around 40 possible action points in the document from the Beijing conference in 2013. So, and it's only feasible to work on a smaller number. So in addition to the data collection that happens in municipalities, then I think it's extremely important to have a real research and comparative education research being carried out here. So I hope that at least that one can start up some research here, and let's see what will happen now. But my guess is that we will also, of course, the cities will have to deal with online teaching, mixed methods of teaching in the aftermath of COVID-19. And I could imagine that also the current crisis in Ukraine will have some influence on cities' life, not least because maybe not in the US, but very many European cities will now have a very big number of refugees that will need to be included in the city life, and I think a very big part of adult education structures will need to integrate people with a bit different cultural background and so on. What I saw today was the new information in media here that many of the people from Ukraine coming now, for example, have not been vaccinated, not only for COVID, but also many other diseases. So kind of this health campaign, health information, or introduction of health in adult education is from a different perspective, once again, very important. So I guess there will be some current tendencies that will be reflected also in the next conferences on an exchange of information and knowledge and research about the learning city. So let me end with saying that I really do hope that the North American Alliance will be part of this movement, despite the obstacle that the US is not a member of UNESCO. I called the other day UIL and asked, can they still be a member? And so on, and they said no. And unfortunately, we would love to, but not possible. But there are other ways of cooperation, of a mutual exchange of inspiration for improving the conditions of citizens in the multiple towns and cities as well in North America. Thank you for giving me the floor for this input to your discussion.
Thank you very much, Arne. It was great to hear that history. Yeah. Woo! I've got lots of questions, and I want to open it up for other people who have questions. one of the ones that stands out to me, I'll give you 3 questions and you can pick which one you want to address. Okay, so
Okay.
one of them is, can you say a bit about how important it is to distinguish adult education from lifelong learning while valuing both? That's one question. And then another one is, yeah, I'll just do one at a time. How about that one? Would you go with that, Arne?
Yeah, I can do that. I don't know why for the first many years, adult education was of the opinion that lifelong learning is the same as adult education. But I guess it's because lifelong learning throughout life, was given a focus more on after school education, lifelong in the other part, what came after formal education. And only from, let's say, 2010 and onwards, we have really got consensus that lifelong learning is all learning from cradle to grave. And therefore, and then, of course, and therefore, what we aim to do is to develop a holistic education and learning system where there are smooth pathways between all the different forms of learning and levels of learning. So you can easily come from one to the next, meaning that it's not, if you have started one study, for example, at university in one subject, and you find out, no, this is not what I want to continue, I go to another MA or whatever, and then you have to start from scratch. No, the modules, the training has to be organized so that you don't need to all the time throughout the whole system to start from scratch. You build on something that you have learned wherever you learned it. And it's not so important where you learned it. It can also be outside of school, as we know. The important thing is what we have learned. And then as we live in a formal education system, it's also important to have it validated. We cannot only claim we have learned something, and it's not necessary that we can do something. We also need to prove with a paper that it lives up to expectations in the system in order to be allowed to go into other parts of the education system. So that's the whole question of recognition, validation, and accreditation of the learning outcomes of non-formal and informal learning. I think the last 10 years at least, there is consensus, it's mainstream, that lifelong learning is all learning, and therefore that adult learning is only adult learning, meaning normally either 16 plus, youngsters learning outside of high school is part of adult learning, or you go from 24 plus as a real adult, which according to the categorization of youngsters and adults, well, is for adults. But I would say we are children and we are young people till, okay, let's say we are 16. But we get much older than 16. We don't stop. Our average life expectancy is not 32 either. And therefore, we are adults the longest time of our life. And the idea that therefore all education resources should be put in the first 16 years of our life is simply bizarre. So the most resources, the most funding, and so on should, of course, go into continued learning and education throughout our life. The longest part is when we are adults. But of course, we are not adults when we go in kindergarten. And lifelong learning includes preschool, school, high school. So therefore, lifelong learning is clear. Adult education is not the same as lifelong learning because it's only for adults. It's a very important part of lifelong learning, but it's not the whole part. So that's how I will explain it.
Annalisa, could I ask a question? She's muted.
Yes, please.
Okay.
Thank you, Arne.
I'm John Wooding in Lowell, Massachusetts. It's great to finally meet you. I've heard a lot about you from Dennis and so forth, and we've been trying to work to make this thing happen. There's a lot of things in your talk that were really interesting, but what you were just talking about, I mean, I for one think of adult education as going to an evening class and learning about how to run computers, you know, or for my job. And you also talked a little bit about how, you know, it's important to focus on the city, and that's why the idea of learning cities came about. In Lowell, you know, selling the idea, if you like, of developing a learning city to the city fathers, and they are fathers for the most part, you know, they really want to emphasize adult education, skill training, pragmatic stuff that goes on. From what you said, I think that we should get rid of the notion of adult education. I much prefer lifelong learning. But you know, people will see that as warm and fuzzy and not real and holistic and so forth. And of course, as you said, it goes on from the day you come out of the womb until you should die. One piece of this I was thinking a little bit about on your comments was workplace learning. You know, most of us end up spending most of our lives at work, right? And most workplace learning, if there's any learning going on, and in most places there's no learning going on, is pragmatic, focused on job and career development, whatever it may be. How do we have learning going on in the workplace that's about poetry and art and dance? You know, I mean, just one comment. Years ago, I went to Cuba and I was in a tobacco factory, and given their traditions, there was a guy sitting in the tobacco factory reading the newspapers and reading novels to the workers as they worked, right? And I was kind of charmed by this, but you know, can we integrate those two things and shift away from the sort of pragmatic consumerist and commodification of learning, you know, and how do we do that? I know that's a big question, but anyway, what the hell?
I too think that workplace learning has been underestimated because we spend much more time at our work than we spend in school. So there have been some analysis, you know, interviews with people where they're asked, where have you learned the most? And where have you learned the most relevant for your life? And more than 80%, they say at work. They don't say at school. They don't say at university. They say at work. That's my first. My second point here is, what is a workplace? Often when we see it in the literature, it's a factory. But a workplace for a university teacher is the university. That's also a workplace. And for a person who works in an office in the municipality, that's also the workplace. And this is where you learn. I've spent a lot of time also at university as a workplace. And I have learned an enormous amount here. Then the third point is you talk about how to develop, for example, creativity as part of the learning at the workplace. And And here, I guess we're not talking about an art teacher or an artist in the atelier, where as part of their workplace, normal learning is related to creativity. But if we look at many of the so-called 21st century skills or transversal skills, the next generation of soft skills that are needed today, then very many workplaces, they say that they would prefer to try to organize work in such a way that it stimulates innovation, creativity, entrepreneurship skills at the workplace, and not only the hardcore specialized skill for creating the machine or for developing a master module at university or wherever you have your workplace. So that I think the discussions I see also among employers in employers associations today is very much about how to first of all, they demand from school that school and university will stress more the development of such skills, so that people already, when they come to the workplace, have developed these skills, so the workplace does not need to pay for the development or to organize it and deal with it. But then if school and university has not already lived up to it, then I see that there's a more and more opening in employers associations to letting that be part of the organized workplace learning.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay.
All right, thank you very much. Let me just take a little energy check here, because we don't have Dennis coming on. Do we want to go on and hear Madeline and John talk about how they have collaborated with Cork, and then we could open up into updates from everyone? Or would you like to pause and take a breakout session now, so you could talk amongst yourselves about either your own Learning City achievements and questions or the content of what we've heard so far? If you would like to go on and hear from Madeline and John, assuming they're okay with that, would you raise your digital hand, please? Or your real hand? Okay, thank you. If you would prefer to go into breakout rooms, am I moving too fast for the digital finder? All right, if you would prefer to go into breakout rooms now, put those hands down and raise your hand if you want to go into breakout rooms. Okay, it looks like Madeline, it looks like you and John, would you be so kind as to talk a bit about this collaboration that Arne was saying he was hoping would be continuing and growing, and what informed part of the Learning Cities Global Network in the first place?
Yeah, happy to do that. I'll start and Madeline chip in. We'll be very brief because you probably do need a break, even though you were sweet enough not to say that. This wouldn't be happening if it wasn't for the city of Cork in Ireland. This whole network came out of it from a long story of our involvement. And I see Siobhan McCarthy's on here, so I will say hi to her from Cork. And it's worth just taking a moment to say how we got to where we are in Lowell, and that was really because of Cork. And the genesis of the Learning City in Lowell was in fact built around sustainability. It came out of a conference we had in 2016, nothing to do with learning cities, about sustainability. And we happened to know some people in Cork who came from the university, one of whom was the provost there and now the president. And he was walking around Lowell with a bunch of us, and he said, Lowell should be a learning city. And we said, what the hell is that? We never heard of it, right? But it turned out that Lowell had a long history of being a kind of a learning city, in part because a post-industrial city like Lowell and the shape it was in, its only way of really growing was to become the first urban national park. So the mills that were part of Lowell's history became a museum, if you like, which sort of riffed on one of the great innovators in Lowell, Pat Morgan, who said he would like to see Lowell to be a classroom without walls. And I, because I was working at the university and involved in community engagement with students and faculty at the university, thought this was a great thing to do. It also came out another trajectory of this, again, to do with sustainability, that we'd already been working on sort of reviving Earth Day celebrations in Lowell and promoting sustainability in the light of climate change and all of those things. So we already had a group of some 30 or 40 not-for-profit partners, organizations in Lowell that serve people and the community working around Earth Day. So what I'm saying is that there was a core in this of our, if you like, the Sustainable Development Goals, but certainly sustainability and environmental concerns that came out of the Learning City initiative here. And getting to be friends with Dennis, with Siobhan, getting to know the folks working in Cork, being invited to the 2017 UNESCO Institute for Lifelong Learning event in Cork, and seeing how wonderful that was. There were some 150 countries represented. There were endless numbers of engagements with folks. And I began to learn about that by being there, and then we began to initiate the idea of a learning city in Lowell. And it's been an uphill struggle, but it arose because of the connections to not only to Cork and Dennis, and before him, Tina Nealon, who was the original coordinator of learning cities in Cork, but also the quickly emerging entire Irish network. The fact that through Dennis and Cork, we became involved with the wellness initiative last year, the European network, and the efforts to create a North American network, stymied somewhat, as Arne said, because the United States absences itself from UNESCO. So our goal, which is to become a UNESCO learning city, can't happen until till the United States rejoins UNESCO. So that raises some problems for us. One of the things, two or three things we learned quickly from Cork and from the idea of what we're doing here was the focus on the neighborhoods. I heard repeatedly from Dennis and others how Cork has said, if you're going to develop a learning city, you have to go, to the grassroots and into the neighborhoods. And that's something that's been a challenge for us here in Lowell, but which Cork has done really well. The second thing, I think, and I'm speaking very quickly so I don't take up your time and give Madeline a chance here, is that you focus this around a festival of learning, which many of the cities in Europe and the rest of the global network do. We do one in Lowell, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. And then we have the tension between sort of community engagement, what learning really is, and the role of the question that came up last, skill building. Is this about re-educating a workforce? This is something, sort of the politicians in Lowell like to hear, because it means it will attract investment and the labor force is organized. For most of us, I think that's not how we think about lifelong learning. And lastly, I think there's a real question about how, given Cork's experience and our experience, how we move forward, especially in a city like Lowell, which sort of mirrors Cork, where there's a major university right downtown. I'm at UMass Lowell's campus, which is right more than a quarter of a mile from downtown Lowell. Some things we should discuss is the role of the university. I saw that in Cork because University College Cork is also about the same distance from downtown, very close to it, right? So there's a whole question of what's the role of the university in that community, as well as the role of the community with the university that we've been trying to struggle with. So that's our relationship. And I think that very shortly, it's really, as I said, without Cork and without the network that we became part of, including the folks here, we could never have developed as far as we've gotten with a learning city. So Madeline, any other thoughts on that?
Of course. Dennis's talk was going to be about local connections, local and global. And it really hit me just looking at everybody on the screen. I know some of you from other calls from Ireland, from Siobhan and Yvonne. And then we have several people from our planning team. And we have Luz, who was from Lowell, but has moved out of the country. But these connections, and within Lowell and then with others across the country, the US and globally. And it sort of hit me that this past year and past 2 years, certainly in the US, has been a very divisive time. And then with COVID and now with war in Ukraine, it's like, for me, it's been the connections amongst us all that I've held on to. And these Zoom calls or planning for the Global Learning Festival or for the Lowell Learning Festival or for the Alliance have really been like an anchor for me personally, and I think for many in our team. So it's not just connections for adult learning or for life learning, but it's almost like connections to nourish our own souls during these times. So that's it, and I will hand it back to Annalisa.
All right. Well, I'm thinking that perhaps we should just move right on into updates, because I know there are some people here who have festivals that are about to start, and I bet Dawn has things to share about what's going on in Austin. So is that all right with you guys if we just move into updates and announcements now? Yeah, thank you, Carolyn. Okay, well, put up your hand or just unmute yourself. We're a small group now. Just unmute yourself if you would like to share something. And turn your camera on if your camera's not on now, unless of course you're naked. Don't do that. I had somebody troll one of my classes with not very much on. Oh. Okay, Wooding people, Lowell people, I'm going to ask you to give us the latest. I know you've been thinking about incorporating as a nonprofit, right? Madeline, you're muted. Thank you.
We hadn't decided who was going to say anything. So.
Is that what that silence is?
Yes.
Go
Okay,
ahead.
well, I can go to Siobhan while you guys gather yourself, because I know Siobhan's got some stuff coming up. What's coming up? Hi.
Hi, Annalisa. I'm here to give Dennis's apologies. We're really sorry. We just we're based in Community and Culture Department of the City Council, so we are reacting to the Ukrainian situation hour by hour, really. So that's where Dennis is at the minute. So I know that if he was here, he would be like me. He'd have a swelled head of all this great talk about how much he did, how much Cork has helped other cities, which is just so great, and vice versa. You know, we get a lot out of connections between the Irish Network of Learning Cities and you guys across the water. I still have to get over there. I still haven't been. So, so I'm looking forward to the trip over, hopefully to see you sometime soon. We've got our festival coming up. So it starts on Monday. I've got, don't know if you can see them all, but we've got 341 events in this year's festival over the week. We introduced it as a blended idea. So if we hadn't had COVID, we probably would be looking at ways to introduce more technology into our festival and more accessibility for people who maybe can't or won't or don't want to leave their home. So we have 40 events that are online and the remainder are face-to-face. I'm conscious I'm in a very busy office, so I'm going to mute myself again, but it's great to be here and to represent Cork, and good to see you all.
Go festival. Yvonne, do you want to say anything about your festival?
Yes, I can. Thank you very much, Annalisa. I'll be brief because I won't have as much detail as Siobhan in Cork, because the Limerick Festival, Lifelong Learning Festival, isn't coming up until the 23rd or the 20th of May. So I have 2 months yet to plan and to learn from Dublin, Derry and Cork. Indeed, it'll be for us, and visiting their tree in the next month in the meantime. But just a couple of interesting things about it. We were delighted to hold a networking meeting at the start of the month in a local hotel where over 55 event organisers came together, because we were just, being tired of being online for 2 years, and it was just lovely to be able to brainstorm and network and plan about co-hosting events together. Another interesting thing about the festival that will be happening in Limerick in May is that just talk there about the universities is that we plan to hold a flagship seminar event, UNESCO Learning City seminar event on the Thursday during our fiscal week in the University of Limerick City. It's based outside kind of 7 miles outside the city, the main UL campus, University of Limerick campus, but they recently took a city centre space to bring that student life into our city. And we're just looking kind of forward to that, working with our third level partners, just kind of quite innovative. But like Siobhan said, that I suppose the 5 cities in Ireland, we are really enjoying working together and loving the thought of meeting up in person in Cork next week. I'm sorry to make you guys jealous, but I think the other 4 cities are, we're really looking forward to it. And I believe that there might be some other people on the call that will be there, and we'll see you next week in Cork.
Yeah, we're jealous, but we're also inspired. So thank you. Okay, John and Madeline,
I'll give a quick update based on what I said about being the children of Cork at this point on our learning city development. But for the last 3 or 4 years, what we've focused on, and it's a very loose organization, I'll come back to that in a second. Several members of our loose organization, Madeline, Belinda, Carolyn, Andy, are on this call. We've been doing this as volunteers for the last 3 or 4 years. We started by building relationships and partnerships. Then we started to try and create learning opportunities and events that were going on in Lowell already, and putting a kind of umbrella around them and building a calendar. We initiated the North American Network of Learning Cities with our first conference in Lowell just before the pandemic hit in 2019. The conference was in 2019 in November, not the pandemic, that came later. We've been working for the last 6 months on our organizational structure. You may think this is kind of weird, but we didn't want to have us in place set organizational structure until we saw that we were engaging all members of the community in what we were doing. So we just very recently, in the last 2 or 3 weeks, have created a board for our Lowell Learning City, and an advisory council made of the very important posh people around Lowell. And the board itself is made up of community organizations and representatives of those organizations that help us fund what we're trying to do, help us think about what we're trying to do, develop a programming for our Festival of Learning. We've had 3 festivals of learning. The first one, there was a 4th one, which was the first one, which is very preliminary. But of course, the last 2 have been virtual. So like everybody else, we've been hammered by that problem, but they've been successful. We put on a lot of stuff. We've also initiated a whole bunch of individual things under the rubric of Lowell Learning City, including, perhaps most importantly, an anthology we published working jointly with Cork, writers from Cork, writers from Lowell. We're going to publish another one in the next couple of months, which is writers from the university, alumni and students from Lowell and from Cork. A model perhaps some of the rest of us from other countries could use. We could, how do we find things to do together that we can be concrete about? So we're trying to do that. So that's roughly our update, without boring you to death. And I know you're desperate to go into a small group or go get a cup of coffee. So I'll let you go, but I'm happy to take questions. Madeline, do you have anything to add? Okay, thank you.
all right, thank you, John. Did anybody else have any updates? I'll tell you, the thing that I had in mind for the discussion groups was to share some updates, to think about what Arne said, but also to think about this upcoming conference. Arne, you spoke about Belim, and this one's coming up in Morocco, and there's a small window of public input into the framework that'll be direction setting, and then aspirational. And right now in the draft, there's only one slight little mention of Learning City. And so one thing I wanted to, if we decide to go into breakout rooms, is to think about, well, what do you wish that the framework said about learning cities? But before we do that, I want to give anybody who wanted to speak a chance to do so.
So, Annalisa,
wait a minute. Okay, go ahead, and then you lose. Okay, go ahead, Linda.
This is Linda Morris from Colo. I'm very glad to hear about John's update, because it touches upon the subject of the webinar that we're going to have, the symposium on building learning cities. That's going to be on April 29th in this same time slot from 10 to 11:30. We'll send you an invitation. Everybody on this call will get the invitation. I sincerely hope you come. We're having a city from Colombia and a city from Venezuela, courtesy of Dennis Barrett's help in identifying these other cities, and a city from the United States. And so we can look at this sort of internationally, and looking and the point of view of the Americas, in building learning cities, which is a unique view. I just wanted to say one other thing, which is, Arne, we really, really appreciated your thoughts and your sharing, particularly going to John's question about the integration of work and learning in different aspects. Your mention of the recommendation for adult learning and education really created a big response on me. I think that if we investigated that recommendation and looked at it a little bit more deeply, we would find real guidance in lifelong learning and adult education activities in the United States and elsewhere. The 3 pillars of competencies for life, competencies for work, competencies for citizenship, for example, emerged from that document and seem so pertinent at this time. So I hadn't made the connection. I appreciate the connection you made.
Thank you for this.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you for both of that. Let's see, Luce, your hand was up.
Yes, hi. I just wanted to apologize for being late, but I was in another meeting. But I'm so looking forward to this because from what I understood in one of the meetings, Medellin is one of the learning cities. And I wanted to connect with you to see if you guys can connect me because I'm living in Medellin. So that's what I would like to see how I can connect with them.
Okay. All right, Arne, maybe you can help with that, or?
Yeah, I think there was the conference, the international conference in Medellin. So I know there's also a lot of information and personal contacts in UIL. So maybe get in contact with Raul, the coordinator of the UNESCO Global Network of Learning Cities, and he has all the Medellin contacts as well, and then it could maybe develop from that.
Thank you.
Great.
What is Raul's last name?
Raul Valdez Cotera.
Gracias.
I can hop in there too, Luz, as we signed a memorandum of understanding with Medellin when we were there at the global conference. So the famous Dennis might have some contacts there that he could pass on. So I'll contact him about that.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, equally famous Siobhan. All right. Any other comments? Otherwise, I'll just show a few slides about this opportunity for public input, and then perhaps I'll just put into the chat where to go if you want to do that individually, or we could spend a little time. Yes, Arne.
I am going myself to Cork in September for their Global Learning Week. And I do hope to see some of you there, so that apart from this online meeting, we could also meet personally and chat. And as you know, Cork is a wonderful place to meet. Also, hello to Chopin from Cork City.
Yes, thank you for that. Let's see, Siobhan, if somebody can put some info in the chat about that Learning Week, that would be great too.
Sure.
Thank you. And here I'm putting in the chat now is the info for the public input into the next framework that will follow up on the Medellin one that's coming up. Carmel, do you have any updates? Does anybody else have any updates that they would like to share? Donald, would you like to share any updates? Just unmute yourself if you would.
Sure.
Go for it.
Well, good morning, everybody. Well, I'm getting prepared. I'm jealous of me. I'm going to say this though. I'm getting prepared to travel to Cork next week for the Learning Festival. So I'm going to get to see it up close and personal for the first time. And so I'm really looking forward to that. Here in Austin, we're continuing our work out in the community and building various partnerships. Since the last call we were all on together with some of you guys, we've expanded our welding in the parking lot program to some more facilities. We're working with one of the housing authority locations here in Austin, and we're providing some skilled training to some of the residents there. And we've also expanded some of our adult basic education programming out in the community, and also our work in the prison. So we're continuing to build out our network of partners and training programs and things, and it continues to cover a range from vocational technical programs to more basic literacy programs. So that's going well. Our next iteration in the model, we're actually taking a cue from Seamus there in Cork, and we're going to be building out our learning neighborhoods here around some of our core community-based and nonprofit organization partners out in the community. So we're roughly going to establish 10 different learning neighborhood areas here in Central Texas. With the focus being on either library, community-based, nonprofit, faith-based organization as a locus, a center of learning activity in that particular area. So we're really trying to build that out, and we're going to be calling it our Learn Local campaign. So that's a bit of an update from here. We're continuing our work from the ground up.
Thank you so much, Don, and have a great time in Cork next week.
I can't believe I'm going. Siobhan, I'll be there. I'll be there in a couple of days. It's great.
Yeah, they'll show you a great time. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, okay. John, you have your hand up, and then Linda, and then I'll give a little update about what's happening in Ithaca. John, you're muted.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this meeting. I'm here at Cornell as a Humphrey Fellow. As you know, it's a program for mid-career professionals, and I'm back home. I'm president and founder of the Association of Mentors for Business Entrepreneurship, working with adult people, women and young people and the disabled. And we were teaching people about different skills about how they can generate incomes in a country like Burundi. And I didn't know about this program, Still Learning, which is what I'm learning here is very important. So I'm trying to see the way I can know more about that and get connected to you. And something else is that with this kind of education, it's very, very important. As we have seen, it's internal motivation is very important. And then what is good is that they are already learning with what they are already doing and having new experiences and new skills, which is very good. And I would like to continue being connected to this. And if it is an opportunity to get integrated in this program, I would appreciate that. I don't know what it takes to be in, but I'm really interested.
Okay, well, there's going to be plenty of events coming up that you can connect to, and I assume Burundi is a member of UNESCO, so you're probably more eligible to have a learning city than we are in the States. Okay, but we welcome you to the North American Alliance for sure. Linda, was your hand up? No, okay. Well, I'll just give a quick update what's happening here in Ithaca. Some of you know I teach a course on lifelong learning, learning cities, and sustainable development, or just sustainability. And the thing that has more traction in Ithaca is sustainability than learning cities. And so we are working with the director of Ithaca's City of Ithaca Sustainability, who's this great guy, Luis Aguirre Torres. We are so lucky to get him. He's Mexican engineer, he's been in the UN, he's just wonderful. So what my little class is doing is they've got so many things going on, and they would like to raise a conversation in the community about participatory budgeting as a means toward more just sustainability. And their idea about sustainability, they call it just 50, I think it is that all of the benefits that come from sustainability measures would benefit, what do they call it? Climate communities, or like communities that are suffering from climate change. And so anyway, they've got so many irons in the fire. They're decarbonizing the buildings, and they're wonderful. So when I said, well, like, we've got these students, well, how can we help? And they said, well, if you could figure out this whole thing about participatory budgeting and how to go about raising that as a conversation, because they've been quite surprised about the flack they've caught from some of their ideas that they introduced to. We don't have a city council, it's called Common Council in Ithaca, but anyway, they introduced that to the local politicians, and they've been very surprised that they get a lot of opposition to some of their ideas. So what this has caused my students and I to do is to learn this thing called an evidence synthesis, or a systematic review, where you actually take a research question to the literature. And our research question is, what are the major findings about participatory budgeting from evidence syntheses that have been conducted in the last 10 years? It's like Brazil was the big leader out front about participatory budgeting. And now they have, that's gone down just a little bit there. So anyway, we're trying to learn this process of doing research on research, and coming up with what we can glean from it to inform Ithaca City about how to go, or just things to be aware of when they go to framing this. So that's my update. Others have update? Monica or Carmel or anybody?
Yes, hello. Can you hear me?
Hello. Yes, please take it away.
I just have some updates, and we conducted a UNESCO Learning City Science Camp with international students in Budapest, and we would like to introduce this in a research to showcase, because it was really an international community, but they are all learning in adult education or the different faculties in Budapest and different universities. And we managed to get them together also with some secondary school students or pupils. So this was a really nice cooperation, and we hope to follow up in this spring. So I think it will be from April, because now we have some other difficulties because of the political situation here in Hungary, unfortunately, with the immigrants crisis and so on. So many NGOs are involved with that, but we hope to follow up from April with this project after the upcoming elections. And another happy news that I would like to share with you is that there is a little town near Budapest, which where we started our research group, and adult education started a consultancy work, and they are very eager to go to PAGE. So we had already exchanged that they would like to become a learning city. And there we have a promising collaboration of local government. For some reason, they realize the importance of lifelong learning, and the contribution and the cooperation with the local NGOs. And we are now about 30 NGOs working together. And we hope that, so we are working towards the goal, but we just began 3 months ago in November, but we have meetings now regularly, which is already a kind of development, I should say, here in Hungary, and we are very happy about that.
Okay. Well, I see that Ramo just came on, and I know that he's always got stuff going on in Pennsylvania. Would you like to give an update?
Good morning, Annalisa. Good morning,
Hey.
folks. Yeah, here in the Pittsburgh area, each of, since the last time we met, each of the 19 environmental justice communities in the greater Pittsburgh area have representative organizations, and we all sat down in a meeting a month ago, and we started laying out, I showed them the guiding documents, right? Right now, Annalisa, we're working on identifying the major issues in each of the communities. So like, what is stopping them from learning? Where are we as far as the citizens themselves? So we have set up a series of focus groups, and we've been doing personal interviews with them as well. We've established a one-day event in the Pittsburgh area. You know that they have a new mayor, Ed Gainey, and he's totally behind this. He's setting up an area for us to have a like a what he's calling a learning day, but I'm not quite comfortable with that. But it's where the trade unions, it's where the literacy people are coming out. It's where a couple of the state representatives are coming out. So we're moving forward.
All right, well, good for you. Thank you for sharing. All right, Arne, do you have any last words that you would like, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I had cut you off a little bit earlier. So if you wanted to have any final thoughts, this would be a time to do it.
No, it's inspiring to hear all the enthusiasm in your group. So I do hope that you can move strongly forward with all these endeavors by inspiration from each other and also from other cities overseas.
Well, thank you again so much for giving us that historical background and your personal reflections on how that all came about. I know I learned a lot today, that making connections that were not apparent to me. So thank you so much for doing that for us. I appreciate that. And thank you, John and Madeline, for being flexible. And we all send good wishes and blessings to Dennis, and thank you, Siobhan, for being here. Does anybody else want to share anything before we sign off? I want to thank my colleague Heidi for being a co-host of this, and my colleague Stefan for being the tech person for us.
Annalisa, just one last quick comment and thank you. The North American folks on this Zoom, we have to think about some kind of strategy to get the United States back into UNESCO, because all of this is, so any thoughts or thinking about how to do that, lobbying your local representatives, that kind of stuff, we still have to have a conversation about that, I think, because, I don't know about in your cities, but in Lowell, it will be really helpful in terms of convincing the city council and the mayor, who are very much in support of what we're trying to do, of moving this thing forward, if we can say we are now putative UNESCO learning city. So that's a thought for everybody there. And it's great to see some folks from around the world that I've seen before on the global events. And I also want to thank very much Annalisa, who put this whole thing together. And without her, we could not have done this. And it's really been great to have this time to see you and to meet Arne and to see everybody else here. Thank you.
John, I totally agree. And I think a little bit of hopefulness on the UNESCO front is that Israel came out and said they would not oppose if the US rejoined. So that means, one, there's a conversation going on, and two, there's a little bit more wiggle room than there had been. Now we just have to convince our Congress people to pay our back dues. Yeah, okay. Well, if no one has...
Annalisa, Monica, did you have something to contribute?
Oh, thank you. Monica, unmute. Go for it.
Yes, thank you so much. Exactly, I like John say regarding the United States, because I have a meeting. I was in court like a month ago, and I have a meeting with Dennis, and we're talking regarding, how we can bring back the United States, to the learning cities, and maybe we try to invite, the Temple City where I live and Belton City where I work. And actually today is someone from the Temple College. I think it's John there. Let me see. I saw
he
him
was
there.
on. I think he left. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. But I try to do something on my part on this side. It's only, and I'm really glad to see everybody back each other to say hi. Thank you.
Well, you got somebody to come, right? So there you go, Monica. All right. Well, blessings all over you on everybody. Thank you again, Arne. Thank you so much for that. And go in peace with compassion for others and yourselves.